Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tired F1 Pod. We are back a couple of days removed from the British Grand Prix, and Shez, I see you radiant. I see you glowing. I mean, this is amazing. Look at you. Looks so shining. What's going on?
Uh, well, that's normally what you say to a pregnant person. I have nothing to announce, but
It
yes, I'm
seems like
pretty
a good
happy.
time to do it if you do,
I'm pretty happy though. Yes, it was a good race, really good race.
Well, really good race. I know you're a little bit tired and you had the chance to share your thoughts, but I thought what we could do, we'll do a few things today. We'll recap the historic win, I think is probably the best way to put it for Lewis Hamilton, what that means for Mercedes. We should also talk about McLaren and kind of their missed opportunity because I really felt like they had not one but two chances at winning that race and they somehow found a way to do a Ferrari and then of course, Max being Max, but there's trouble at Red Bull. We could talk about that. And then finally, I wanna share my sorrow and my tears with my fellow Tifosi that might be watching this, and for the rest of you to drink in my tears as well. So there's yet the weekend, and for me, the Monaco course lives on. It's just a different form that it's taken in 2024, but here we are. Well, let's jump into the main headline, like which is Lewis Hamilton winning in an epic fashion. I mean, for me, this was a race even better than Canada, only because this was a pure race in and of itself. There was nothing more to it, right? There was no safety car. I cannot even remember seeing a yellow flag. I don't think there was anything like that. So I think outside of the natural elements, there was nothing really bothering the race by itself. And then to see Lewis Hamilton win it, it's sort of a poetic thing. And I have many thoughts sort of going back to the last couple years, but how did you take it all in?
I mean, it was yeah, from the word go, it was just edge of your seat stuff, wasn't it? There was everything there. You had a historic racetrack, a track that always throws up some great racing and some surprises every now and again as well. You had a bit of weather, great British weather, and but it wasn't like a deluge. It wasn't consistent. There was decisions to be made, and there was strategy to be got right or wrong. Um, and then there was some absolutely unbelievable driving performances, and all of it culminated in that that three-way um, sprint in the final stint for the race win. And I think for me that was what defined that race was that final stint with the with two of the best drivers. Well, I think for me the two best drivers on the grid right now, absolutely going at it with Lando in there too. It was yeah, it was good fun.
Yeah, I think
How
the
did you digest it? We haven't had a chance to chat about this yet.
no, this was I felt both excited to watch as a neutral fan and also felt sad, right? Because I kept thinking to myself, how on earth is Mercedes doing this when we should have been the ones in there? But I just felt less stressed watching it. I could truly enjoy it as a neutral observer. As you said, I mean, that last stint was really interesting, and I think any of the four drivers that were in the race, George had retired by then already, so he was kind of out of it. But any four of those drivers could have won it. And I kept thinking this was Lando's day because he was in the lead and they had everything in their grasp. And I was kind of reminded of this kind of happened in 2022, right, with Ferrari when they had Charles in the lead and they had Carlos, and then they chose not to double stack and and it kind of happened all over again, albeit with slightly different circumstances. I think this is an epic win for Lewis, right? Because what was amazing to me is to see the humanity of the person behind the helmet, right? And you couldn't help but see it, not just from the crowd that was obviously there to support him, not just from his team, but you could see it from his peers. I mean, even Max drove by him and gave him a sort of a respectful sort of celebratory pass, and George came over and congratulated. And I'm sure other drivers did at different points. I haven't seen all the footage, but. Um, I told you this a while back, right? And this I think kind of came true and seeing Lewis's emotion post race, which is the pain of losing is far greater than the joy of winning. And you could see that the pain of losing in 2021, which he kind of brought up himself, and then everything since then had really been, sort of reaching this sort of boiling point, if you will, and it all kind of came to a head with that win. He couldn't believe that he was winning, and we have done several videos and discussions on whether whether he would ever win again, whether he would ever regain the form, whether he was too old, whether he lost his touch, whatever. And at the end of the day, when it mattered the most, he did pull it out. And oh, by the way, two or three more laps left, that could have been a completely different race altogether. But we were denied that in some ways. But I think this was for the sport and for Lewis and for his fans like yourself and for the general Formula One fan. I think this was an epic result in every way.
Yeah, I think cathartic is probably the best way to describe how I felt after the race, and it felt like Lewis was feeling, and I think generally what a lot of Lewis Hamilton fans needed. This has been a really long time coming, like 945 days, 2.5 years, however you want to put it. It's been a long time, and yeah, like I said before, it was interesting to hear that Lewis has had the same doubts and worries that we've been talking about, and that I think the hard work and the motivation and the sheer stubbornness to just keep going, um, to eventually get a win out of it. I think that's what came out at the end of that race. Like Ammar, I still can't really uh, see that picture of him hugging his dad, or like hearing Bono on the radio, or seeing that post-race interview without feeling a little bit emotional about it. It was that, like, the whole thing just meant so much, and that's in a season of emotional wins. You talked about all the drivers coming to congratulate him. We had the same thing in Miami, didn't we? Where Lando's win was extremely popular, and this felt like the next step on from that in terms of how it was received across F1 and the rest of the wider sort of F1 community. It was really, really good.
Yeah, I think this was really. I mean, I get why Lewis would have had doubts about himself, but the reality is that as soon as Mercedes were competitive, they basically won two races in a row, right? Maybe you could have argued they could have won in Canada. So again, within a span of 4 or 5 races, they managed to make it happen. So it's not like they had legitimate chances of winning over the last 2.5 years, whatever we want to call it. So
Yeah,
I
agreed.
think this is really amazing. What's also most amazing about this is now you have you have we're looking up to this is going to be a season that will shape up to be a blockbuster one. And I think that while Max has this lead right now, I think anything can happen. A couple DNFs here and there. You never know. There's some tracks that are coming up that will not favor Red Bull, and I don't think you can favor them at any track anymore. There's going to be legitimate questions about that because McLaren were the faster car or the fastest car this weekend, and they managed to give it away. But the reality also is that Mercedes are in the mix, and when you throw in weather and things like that, I think it's shaping itself up to be a really, really interesting season.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily. You're talking DNFs in terms of like how it shapes the constructors and the drivers' titles, right? Like, again, as before, I'm not that fussed about the constructors or the drivers anymore. It's just individual races are now very, very interesting. Like every race, you're going into it, you're not entirely sure what's going to happen, who's going to be fastest, who's going to have the advantage, who's going to come out on top at the end of it, and whether that's Max or Lando. Well, we'll talk about Lando in a minute, or either of the Mercedes drivers. Um, it's just interesting to come into a race and have something fun to watch, rather than what we were subjected to last season, where we were having to create storylines where there barely were any.
Yeah.
So that's really all I needed. What I think is going to be fun now is that there's 6 different winners this season, every one of them is going to be fired up even more to try and get more wins on the board, to try and wrest a championship off of Max if it's possible. But um, but there's a belief there now that it's not just a one man show. And that's what makes this exciting.
Yeah, and I think kudos to Mercedes, right? Again, it's not too long ago where we were at your home race listening to Toto Wolff talking about, well, we're going to use pretty much every session here on out as a practice session. And, fast forward to where we're at now. I mean, this was a win in Silverstone that was legitimately, won on pure pace. It wasn't the Austria win that was sort of inherited, right? And well deservedly so, but to just see Mercedes make that huge jump, I don't think we could have said that. I mean, they had the start of the season, and with the first couple of races, you wouldn't have really thought that that would be the case. So it's amazing. That also gives me a slightly bit of hope for Ferrari as well, although they need to get their act together. But it does sort of we're now at that peak stage of these regulations, and that convergence is now really truly well on. So next year is going to be even greater, as great as this year.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You want to move
Um,
along to McLaren then?
yeah, we're gonna have
Yeah,
to. That
let's
was
do.
how did you digest Lando and McLaren's performance? Well, actually, I take that back. Not just Lando, just McLaren's performance overall, because I think everybody um, in that team, other than maybe the Australian, uh, was pretty was not fault free.
Yeah, I mean, look, McLaren are a team that are just learning to win. Like they haven't won a race that we can remember in I don't know how long, right? Like I'm sure they won here and there, but they haven't consistently been in this for quite a while, right? So they're gonna have to learn how to grow out of these things. I thought this was very ironic that on the weekend where Zach Brown Hall had all this bluster about Red Bull and their management and their culture that he was on the he was on the broadcast radio and talking about all this confidence and really his team couldn't nail the strategy. And I think that this has got to be a really hurtful thing because they had a legitimate shot at winning the race with Lando, and you could argue they had a shot with Oscar as well. And what they did was really inexcusable in some ways, in that they kind of left. I mean, what was interesting to me is that they're having Lando make the tire choice. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. Like you have all the data, you know that in the last circle of pit stops, Lewis is out and gone ahead with a pair of softs, and Verstappen has a hard tire. McLaren had been the fastest car on mediums pretty much all weekend from all the data, and so it was just inexcusable that they decided to do that. Like that was a pure giveaway, and I think that although Lando came on board and he tried to play the team game, that really wasn't his fault. Like he's not supposed to be making the call of whether they have to do
Agreed.
mediums or softs or hards. Or that's not his thing. It's one thing to in changing conditions, do you need to go on a different tire or wet tire or enter that, all that makes sense, but they just kind of gave it away.
Yeah, so Lado fans, don't come at me for this, please. But I am reminded of a quote that Lando made um after the I think it was the German Grand Prix in 2020. So Lewis had just broken the all-time wins record, and Lando at that point had said doesn't mean anything because Lewis is in a car which should win every race, and he only has to beat one or two other drivers. That's what he said, right? Back in 2020. I think he's finding out right now that it's not as simple as that. It's not about just jumping in a car that's faster than everybody else's and winning hundreds of races. Like there is more to it than that. Um, and there's no question, I think, that over the course of the race on Sunday, the McLaren was the quickest package. There was no point in that race really where Lando and Oscar didn't have some kind of advantage over everybody else. When they're on the same tires, the McLarens were just out and out quicker in the both in the changeable conditions and in the dry portions of the race. So Lando has that car and he's not winning, so it's not that straightforward to just jump in a car and win. What I've said before is that to be successful, every race team needs three things, right? They need technical, they need operational nous, and they need to be strategically on their game. And from a technical point of view, they've got an opportunity right now, right? They've got a car that can win races. And from an operational point of view, more often than not, although this race wasn't a good example, more often than not, they knock out good pit stops. Um, they do the nitty-gritty things just about right. They're not always class leading, but they're not far off. But from a strategy point of view, that's why they're sort of falling down. And from a driving point of view, there's been a few mistakes. I think it's important to just run through the individual mistakes that happen in this race, because every one of them, I thought, were mistakes that in the moment you could tell were mistakes that were going to cost them, right? I mean, the first one was when it came to when the second cell, we're calling it cells now, aren't we? When the second cell of rain came down, um, everyone changed to inters. Max and Carlos made an absolutely inspired call to come in a lap earlier, but everybody else came in the lap after, and McLaren, rather than double stacking their two drivers, tried to long it out and made Oscar go around one more lap before he came in to have his inters, and that absolutely ruined his race. It put him behind Max, it put him behind George, and it put him far enough behind all of the front runners in the end that even with a tire advantage at the end, because he was the only one that made the right call to go into mediums on a McLaren at the final stint, he was too far away to make any difference. So that put him out the race completely when he, as you say, absolutely had a chance to be in there for the win. So that was mistake number one. Second was leaving Lando out a lap too long when it was time to come back onto slicks. Lando then making an error in the pit stop, so overshooting his marks, which added some time, which I think ultimately actually cost him position to Lewis, because even without that, even with having come in a lap later, he probably still had the advantage over Lewis. And then the final thing is, as you say, like why are McLaren giving the choice to the drivers about what tires you go on to? They're the ones with all the information on the pit wall and all of the data from free practice and everything else. Why, they had saved those medium tires for this very reason. That's why Oscar had got onto them. It wasn't a inspired, clever choice by Oscar. That should have been the default position, but no, they put him on a set of softs, which didn't make any sense to me. So they had everything in front of them to win that race, and they made enough errors to throw it away. And Lewis drove an incredible race, and Max was unbelievable across that race. Both those teams, Mercedes and Red Bull, and their respective drivers made all of the right decisions based on what they could feel in the car and what the pervading atmosphere of the race was telling them to do, and it worked out. They did really well. You said something there about McLaren learning how to get into this again, right? How to win. I don't think you always get the opportunities you think you do, right? The chance they have right now to win races and to win, to really take it to Red Bull and Max in the constructors. You don't know if they're going to have that opportunity again next season or in 2026, right? So them having to learn, that's not a good enough excuse. Like, they've had enough races now where these things keep happening, that they should be getting on top of them, and they're now starting to cost them big time.
But what you can see here is a clear example of two teams that got it wrong and two teams that got it right with the same number of chances. Both Red Bull with Max. And I know we can talk about Perez, but he was really out of it, so they didn't have anything to lose with him. So that was not a good call, but whatever. He wasn't actually going to even get into the points. But Red Bull with one shot at it and Mercedes with one shot at it got it right. And these are two teams that have been fighting for championships for the past decade plus. The other two teams that got it wrong, Ferrari and McLaren, have not been there. And you had to see even Carlos. I mean, you're seeing drivers from again within the car make calls and say, "No, I don't want to go on inters yet. I can still keep." And so there is a difference. And my point is, you're right. It's not an excuse. Absolutely not an excuse. But I think that's an explanation. I mean, what else could be an explanation? Like, as you just said, they have all the three pieces that you described in place to be successful. So, but when you're in the thick of it and you have to deal with not one but two competitors, that's a lot of pressure. I will say though, they had two drivers, so they could have played this any different number of ways that they chose the exact wrong thing, which we've seen teams do in the past. So this is not new.
That was them. That double stack was McLaren not trusting their own operational ability. That's why they sent Oscar round again. Oscar was maybe a little bit too close to Lando. He could have dropped off a little bit.
But Chess, it's
And
not just the double stack. They could have asked Oscar to start backing people up. Like they could have made this work. It's not a true double stack in that there would be another car waiting. They could have been smart about this. God, I mean, Oscar was still fighting Lando up until the point that Lando entered for the pits, right? I mean, so there is a little bit of that element of like understanding the race that the pit wall can dictate and say, okay, look,
absolutely.
we're coming into a pit window, maybe start backing people up, right? Or whatever it is. Like you could tell they were ready to go, but they just whiffed. I mean, that's all it is, really.
Yeah, I mean, but this whole thing about Mercedes and Red Bull having won races and having championship experience. Red Bull for the 8 seasons that they weren't winning any races were just sitting there honing all of this stuff. McLaren, what the heck were they doing? Right?
Yeah, but I mean, also let's put a little bit of a pin in the Mercedes stuff too, right? Because Lewis would have been in trouble had Max been able to get past Lando a little bit quickly. Had Max had medium tires, I know it's ifs and buts and all that, but their soft tire thing was also suspect, right?
But
And
that's all they
that's
had,
all they
right?
had, right? And they wouldn't have had any choice. But I'm saying that the race win could have gone away from them, and we might have been having a
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
so.
Like I'm not.
So
Yeah,
I get it. I
I
mean, these
think.
are such fine margins, Chaz. Like it is.
Yeah,
I
I
get it.
don't.
Yeah.
Go on,
No, no,
go
you're
on.
good, bro.
Sorry.
I was gonna say that if we're sitting again in hindsight, we can do these things right. But just to give a little bit, in fairness to McLaren, a little bit, right? I agree with you to a certain extent that
Yeah.
this is gonna hurt them. But I also have complete confidence in them versus my own team that they will not make this mistake again.
I don't have that confidence because they keep making like silly errors, right? Um whether it's a driving mistake or it's a, a pit stop error. Canada was a case in point. Again, Lando should have won that race, but they didn't bring him in when they should have brought him in. He went round for another lap in, and got overtaken. These
Yeah,
are all they're not big errors, but they're fine margins that you
but
can see
but
in real time.
but
That was the problem about Silverstone, right? It wasn't about hindsight. Like I was shouting at my screen
yes,
saying, like,
but
what the heck are you guys
I
doing?
agree with you.
And they have more information than I do.
The reason I'm saying they're learning this is they just haven't had this kind of experience over a stretch of time when they've been competitive. Like that's just all it is. Like how else do you explain it? Are you suggesting that they're incompetent then? All I'm saying
Yes,
is they're
that's exactly what I'm saying.
okay. And then my reasoning for that is that they simply haven't been in these situations enough. Now we can define what that measurement is. Is it one race? Is it two races? Is it three races, four races, five races? But again, you could see a team like Mercedes. They've been doing this. They've been the champions of the undercut, like for forever, right? So they know they have everything in there, and it was just amazing to me. I mean, this is more of a compliment to them than a dig at McLaren, right? That they again, as soon as this is the first race, maybe outside of Canada, that you can say that they were legitimately going to win based on pure pace, and they had everything correct. I mean, even look at Red Bull, despite being nowhere. I mean, to win second and for Max to walk away with still extending his lead in the championship is just amazing.
Yeah, I get all of that, But like I said, when Red Bull were not winning, they were honing all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
McLaren were very vocal about how they were getting sub 2 second pit stops, but they clearly weren't focusing on strategy enough to get them the best out of that. Whereas Red Bull were every opportunity they had when they weren't winning, they took that opportunity to get the best result they possibly could. Because that then means that when you do have the car to win, you're not squandering those opportunities. That is what McLaren are doing right now. And if they continue to do this, what my worry is, as I've said, is that they'll turn up in 2025, they'll turn up in 2026, and they won't have that car, and then it'll be too late. You have to take the opportunities when you have them because you just don't know when they're going to come round again in F1.
No, I agree with you. I think that's a fair point to make. And maybe let's pivot now to a team that has made the most of what they have, although their decisions off track are a little bit more questionable. But when it comes to the race day, I mean, what did you think of Max and Red Bull's race?
Whoa. Wow. Max was so this race defined for me like the difference between Lewis and Max in a sort of global kind of sense, right? Like Lewis gets a sniff of a victory, boom, he's there, he's on it, right? He has a car that's ready to fight. Yeah, you'll see him come with his claws out. Max seems to be just like it doesn't matter what session it is, whether he's driving around in a sim session or he's balls out quali three. It's the same commitment no matter what. And you could argue a bit of that is because he knows that wins are on the line, titles are on the line, and he will make the most of it every single time. But to be fair, he was doing this in 2019 and 2020 as well. Like it was just all out all the time. Um, the fact that he had that incident in quali one in on the Saturday and then still stuck it on fourth. There's no way that car should have been fourth with the damage that it had, right? Red Bull have got a bit of credit to take as well for fixing what they could, but he still went into Q3 with a damaged car. Even he was surprised that he put it fourth, right? Um, in the race, yeah, he fell back, again to the mean of his car a little bit. Like the other teams were just quicker at different phases of the race on the same tires, but he made the right call to go onto Inters. The you know at the time when he needed to do it to give him an advantage, he his team put him on a new set of tires, and it's quickly becoming evident now that the new tires are better than the better compound, if that makes sense, right? So it's better to be on a new set of hards than it is to be on a used set of mediums, right? So both Mercedes and Red Bull made that call respectively. But Max brought in his tires nicely, kept himself in touch in that final stint, and then bang, I called him a great white shark, and I think that's what he is. He's that guy who's always in your mirrors or miles out ahead. There's no point in any race where you can let up against Max Verstappen because he will not let it go. Just from lights to flag, he will not let it go. And that's what we saw. It was just an unbelievable performance again. And I think he just makes the impossible look mundane. And that's I think the highest compliment you can give someone. It's very Schumacher, it's very Senna, like just every time he gets in the car. And I don't think anyone else on the grid right now has that.
Yeah, I think the epitome of Max's greatness to me was watching the coverage where I see the on the side of my screen Charles pitting for Inters, and at the same time they're playing the radio from the team to Max, and he just basically shoos them up and says, no, not right now. And that's exactly the greatness of the driver, where you know that, I mean, I don't we've run out of superlatives to really sort of describe his greatness. And even on a day when he shouldn't have been anywhere close to. And again, he probably would have finished outside of the top three had McLaren got it right, right? he managed to get second. And you're right, even in qualifying. Although I will say in qualifying, he can thank my Ferrari for it because they were nowhere to be found, and so that was going to happen. So there you go. You're welcome, Max, is what I want to say there. But yeah, I mean, this season, and again, if he wins this season, I don't think that you can now sort of step out and say that for sure, because you start to see these cracks form and then eventually it starts to expand, right? I'm not suggesting by any means that Max is going to be any less better than he already has been. He's been superb, but you can start to see the pressure build up on Red Bull. And
I
yeah,
I see this very much like Max Verstappen's 2018 season. As in his version of Lewis in 2018, right? Where Lewis didn't necessarily have the fastest car, but the combination of Mercedes sort of getting all of their strategy and operations right, and the fact that he just wouldn't let it go,
yeah,
and just drove at the top of his game every single race, made the passes when they needed to be made the right calls in changeable conditions. I think of Hockenheim that season was a good example of that. But that's what Max is doing now, right? He doesn't have the car necessarily to win the races every single time. In fact, he really doesn't. But when the opportunity arises, when he has to do something, it just gets done. And he puts himself in a position to make those things happen every single time. And
the
that's how he's going to win this championship.
Yeah, and again, I'm not suggesting that he won't win it. I'm just saying that this has become a lot more thrilling than we thought it would be after Bahrain
Yeah.
and Jeddah.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
I
And
think
this
the
is what we
problem
wanted
that
to
Red
see,
Bull
wasn't it?
have, yeah, this is exactly what we wanted to see. The problem that Red Bull have is Checo is nowhere to be found, and I think that is the more interesting story here. And it really now we start to hear leaks and the things about contracts that are supposedly these are supposed to be confidential things, and now we're hearing stuff like, well, he has to be within 100 points of Max to be able to keep us in. And you
Yeah.
got to wonder if the silly season is actually over. And what blew my mind is that Daniel Ricciardo could actually be put in that seat, and I just cannot for the life of me understand why did it, like, what do these two have that Yuki doesn't have? Like, Yuki, get on WhatsApp, man. What's going on? Like, I mean,
Mate.
a driver that has been so consistent, so great. It seems
And
like
and
no
was
one
back
seems to
again,
notice
wasn't
it.
he?
Right, exactly. It was back in it again. I mean, I don't. It's just head scratching in ways, and I said this out on social media a couple of days ago. But for a team like Red Bull that has been known to be ruthless in sacking drivers for non-performance, right? Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon. I mean, if you want to throw Nick DeVries, right? But he was. I know he wasn't in Red Bull, but I mean, they have not literally. They didn't give Nick even half a season. I mean, this time around last year was when that change happened. Like, it's just ridiculous to me to see them stick with Checo in the way they're sticking with him, and then as an alternate to put Daniel in there. Like, that makes no sense on
Yeah,
earth.
I agree.
I just don't
Yeah, but
understand.
yeah, I agree. It's strange, isn't it? Like you said, that ruthlessness that they normally have. This seems like a very apathetic decision. Like it's just this is what we've got right now, so let's just stick with it. And it's yeah, I mean, there's clearly non-performance reasons for why Checo got his extension, and why Daniel continues to be in his seat at RB, because they're not performing in a way that in a way that they should be, and it is starting to cost Red Bull. I think I saw somewhere that in the last 7 races, um, Checo scored what, 15 points?
Mhm.
15 points in a Red Bull that's winning the constructors and winning nearly every race this season. That's just not good enough. It's
It,
just not good enough, is it?
it's just amazing to me when you have drivers like Carlos on the market and they won't bring him in for whatever the interpersonal anxieties and tension is. Fair enough. Okay, that's the case. But like, what are you doing here? Like, and what is I just don't get it. But anyway, speaking of that, that stat reminded me that actually I believe that Haas has scored more points in that same stretch of races that you described than Checo Perez. And
That's Checo Perez.
I do want to take a quick shout out to Haas, right? Because we came on here after the firing of Gunther Steiner and questioned Gene Haas's motivation, but apparently he's a genius with and we should give credit to Ayo Komatsu, but because he's really found a way to make this team work way beyond its capabilities. And I'm just like hurt to see Nico Hulkenberg score two sixth place finishes when Charles hasn't scored a point in the last two races. Like, I just don't even understand that.
Yeah. Okay, we should talk about that because
Yes.
there were a couple of things about Charles' race that messed it up, but they were in stark contrast with Nico because Nico nailed qualifying, right? Put his car in the top 10, brilliant. And then in the race, made all the right calls, was fast when he needed to be, and got himself ahead of a bunch of Astons and Sauers and Williams. It was a really, really good race, right? That was vintage Nico Hulkenberg when he doesn't make a mistake because he's about to get a podium. That's usually when he makes a big error. But here he was flawless, and so were Haas. That's what you needed to get the best result you possibly could
Yeah, but it's not just this
at
race.
Silverstone.
It's even the last race, right? It's even the
But
last
this
race.
but this race really highlighted it for me because what the heck was Charles doing, man? Like
Man, I
out
don't
and
mean,
out in Q2, like this is the guy that's meant to be like the fastest on the grid over one lap. That's what I thought. But again, when the car isn't quite as optimal as it could be, it's Carlos that gets the most out of it. And I'm worried for Charles again that as the car starts to regress a little bit, as they're struggling with getting the best out of it with this new upgrade, that Carlos will start to get a few more qualifying victories up his up on Charles. And in the races, it will come down to these silly strategy calls. Like, what was he doing like going on to Inters when the track was bone dry? You still had, you heard Lewis and you heard Max both saying it's not ready. Charles has the same information in front of him. That's not the same as McLaren's call about what kind of tire. That the driver has to take some responsibility for that, right? That they know what the track is like, and if the team is saying we want to come onto Inters, well, it's up to the driver to overrule the team on that, and he didn't do it. Come on, Charles. Okay, go on. This is time for your lament.
I don't, I mean,
Hit me.
these sessions are now becoming, therapy sessions for me, right? Because I came on here after Monaco and I said, put everything on the table. We're fighting for everything. And since having committed to that, we have nothing to show for. Like, it's a big, giant, fat egg that we can show for it. Like, there's literally nothing in there that I can stand by and say, I mean, yeah, I'm with you. I just couldn't believe my eyes, right? And what I've done now for the last 3 weekends since that Monaco race is repeat this phrase over and over again. What are you doing? Because this is again vintage Ferrari showing up in classic Ferrari style, doing classic Ferrari things where they have said to themselves, "Well, we're gonna zig when everyone else zags," and it's like, ah. And you know what hurts about this the most compared to even Austria, right, is Charles had done a really good job at the start of the race. He made up places from 11th all the way up to 7th, and then he overtook Stroll right before the first sort of rain cell was coming into play. He was 6th. We could have managed a 5th and a 6th. That was very much on the car. Like, I get that we're not competitive right now, right? I get it. I get it. I get that the development has not worked out in the way that, and we can talk about that in a second, but good God, at least let's take what we can on the race day and move on. Like, we don't have to like overthink this stuff and do all kinds of wacky things. I said before, it was one thing for Checo to be put on inters and for them to try it out because he was so far back. But at one point, Checo and Charles were together. That's how bad, epically bad that decision was. And then it's one thing to make that goddamn decision, but get off it. Like it is not, the rain's not coming. So now by the time the next, I mean, it is just like, let me compound bad decision after bad. And they're just in this weird fun. I think Charles said it best. Like, I don't even know what to say anymore. And I think that's just all of us. Like, we don't even know what to say. I will say though, shout out to Carlos for being everything that I thought he was going to be ever since they announced that he is not coming back. And I'll come back here and fight with you every single day. This was yet another example of a race when Carlos is doing the things that you would expect for Charles to do from within the cockpit. He overruled the change to inters. He was right up on Max's tail. And oh, if Ferrari had been slightly better, he would have passed Max. He would have. And even Max said in the cool down, right? He was surprised that Carlos was like 6 seconds back at one point. And then the next thing you know, he's right in his mirrors. And you could see the smooth operator being smooth. And Charles's side, and this is blame for everyone, including himself, has been anything but that. Really anything but that for the last three races when Carlos has been right there, thereabouts in every single race, and he has maximized everything that Ferrari's given. Now, I mean, I don't know what the hell Ferrari are going to do. I have no idea. Now they've gone back to the Imola spec. The only reason I have any optimism is having seen Mercedes come to the fight so quickly, is that leaves me with a slight hint of optimism that we can get there. But good God, I have no confidence in general.
I think, yeah, I think Ferrari's main problem at the moment is that their upgrade has put them back, hasn't it? It looks like they probably just got a bit greedy with the amount of downforce they were seeing in the wind tunnel, and then forgot that if you whack on downforce in this era of regulations, that you increase the risk that you're going to get bouncing, and
Yeah, but Ches, you just
that's
got done
what
telling
they're
me that McLaren shouldn't be doing these things. Ferrari should not be doing these things. Period. Like they
which
were
which
trying
which
to,
which
to
which things
dominate the
that
era.
are
All of
the
these things from a development standpoint, from a race management standpoint, all of these, if we can talk about McLaren, I mean, Ferrari have literally been waiting for these rule sets to come into play so we can dominate. We have been nowhere close, and this is unacceptable anymore.
yeah. So this is an issue, right? So okay, first thing to deal with is this development thing, right? That there's an idea that Ferrari can't develop a car in season. I I agree with that to an extent, but last season showed that they can do it, right? They had a car in the middle of the season that was starting to drop off a little bit, but they brought upgrades, focused upgrades that brought the car back into the windows that by the end of the season, although they didn't make a massive jump like McLaren did, they made steps that by the end of the season, the Ferrari was easily the second fastest car on the grid, and Charles was making the most of that. That's what Charles does when the car he's that classic raise your ceiling driver, right? That when the car comes, when it's starting to get good, he will exponentially get better with it, right? This season, they've not done that. They've had one major blunder, I think, in terms of their upgrades, and now they're compounding that with strategy and operational errors as well. Um, and that's now having a there's also that in the background a personnel issue. This week we hear that Enrico Cardile, the head of chassis, who's been there for 20 years, is leaving to go to Aston Martin. The rumor mill has it that at least part of that was because he was a little bit upset about how hard they were chasing Adrian Newey, which you know Newey is also now not guaranteed with Aston, ironically, being perhaps favourite to secure his services. So there's a little bit of organizational stuff, in the background that they're not quite getting right. There's a problem with correlation. That's what this upgrade comes down to. They chased downforce and ended up with lots of bouncing. And then they're making silly strategy calls as well. So all of the three things that you need them to be good at, they're kind of falling down on at the moment. And I have to say, it's not what I expected with Fred at the helm. But there's still 12 races to go. They still have to optimize and try and work out how they understand this upgrade and what they need to get from this car. maybe this is just their mid-season dip. Maybe they come back strong later on in the season. It's close enough at the front that it's not out of the question that they're going to do that.
Yeah, the only race I can be optimistic for is the next one in Hungary because it does require a lot of downforce and you can kind of get away with some of the bouncing issues, but we're gonna struggle in Spa before the break. So my goal for them is to just get past this and try to maximize on the race weekend and try to get the data which they've been trying to get and make it better. But I don't know. I mean, had they not won in Monaco, I mean, the last two races would have looked even worse than they do. I think Monaco is sort of a saving grace in all of this, but they haven't legitimately looked competitive in I don't know in 2 months now, and it's pretty disappointing to see because um, whatever you're describing, right, the organizational structure issue is something we've given Fred credit for, and I think not right now. I think the spotlight is back on him to kind of see if he can make this happen or not. But there we go. Yeah. You can be happy this weekend. Maybe be a little bit worried about next year.
It is what it is, man.
It is what it is.
Yeah, take like I hear that. I hear that whole Lewis should be worried about going to Ferrari given what Mercedes is doing right now. But I mean, you got to live in the moment, and you don't know what is going to happen around the corner. I think on that epithet, we should probably end it. Thanks everyone for listening. It was a really eventful weekend. I'm glad Ammar and I finally got to have our
Yeah,
chat together. Ammar was great as usual.
likewise.
Um, if you like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read them all. We reply to as many as we possibly can. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Fix it, Fred.